So now we're going to go over adjective clauses. And just as a review, we have two main groups of clauses: independent clauses and dependent clauses. Of the types of dependent clauses, there are three: adverb clauses, adjective clauses, and noun clauses. We covered adverb clauses previously. Now we're doing adjective clauses. So an adjective clause, just like an adverb clause, is a dependent clause, which means what? Group of words, right? Subject and a verb, which can't stand alone. That's what makes it dependent, and is used as a single part of speech. Exact same definition, right, as an adverb clause, except there's one thing that's different: the single part of speech. A dependent clause used as an adverb is an adverb clause. A dependent clause used as an adjective is an adjective clause. And a dependent clause used as a noun is a noun clause. So it's used as an adjective, a word which modifies a noun or pronoun, telling which one, what kind, whose, and how many. The adjective questions. Always remember the adjective questions. So now, the most important thing for identifying adjective clauses is what I've highlighted in blue. An adjective clause is introduced by a relative pronoun: who, whose, whom, that, which. These are the 5 relative pronouns. If you see one of these, you're going to, 90% of the time, see the beginning of an adjective clause. So let's look at this example sentence. The dog that barked is Rex. Now, if I were using that clue I just gave, just find the relative pronoun. Okay, that I know is a relative pronoun. Okay, now I'm looking for a clause. Okay, that barked. Barked is a verb. Okay, so what I'm going to say is that this relative pronoun, that, is the subject for barked. So if you look down here, how they've diagrammed it, that barked. Subject, verb. But let's look at this sentence from another point of view. So imagine I'm looking at it. Okay. The dog that barked is Rex. Here's another way to go about it. Ask yourself, what is the independent clause? The dog that barked is Rex. Where's the verb for the dog? Some of you may think it's barked, okay, but that is actually the subject for barked. The dog that barked is Rex. The dog is Rex. This is the verb and the predicate noun for the dog. The dog is Rex. I can take that barked out of the sentence, and the sentence makes perfect sense. The dog is Rex. Now, look at that barked. It is a dependent clause. Why? Well, it has a subject, that. Pronouns can be subjects. And it has a verb, barked. This clause, that barked, can't stand alone. And it's modifying dog. What kind of dog? Or which one? It could be which one. The dog that barked, right? So which one? The dog that barked. That dog, the one that barked. So this is an adjective clause. It's modifying dog. It's modifying dog. So how are we going to diagram it? Well, first thing, and if you don't go in this order, you will diagram it incorrectly, I promise you. First thing you have to do, diagram the independent clause. The dog is Rex. That's the first thing you do. First identify it, then diagram it. The dog is Rex. Then diagram the adjective clause. That barked. I know that barked is the adjective clause because it begins with that, which is a relative pronoun, and that's the subject of this clause, and then barked is the verb. Now, I know what you're thinking. This looks very strange. What do you mean? Let me ask you this. Who is the doer of the verb barked? If you're thinking in terms of the meaning of the sentence, we know the dog is the one doing the barking. But grammatically, that is the doer of the verb barked. That refers back to dog. That's why we drop this dotted line from the dog to that. Okay, because that is referring back to the dog. So grammatically, that is the doer of the verb. But in terms of the meaning, the that is referring back to the dog. So the dog is in effect the one that barked, right? We know that. Okay, so don't get confused between what's going on in the meaning and then what's going on grammatically. So every time you do these, identify the independent clause first, then the dependent clause, the adjective clause, or, you could identify that barked. You could see that, oh, there's a dependent clause. Okay, now what's the independent clause? The dog is Rex. But always diagram the independent clause first. That'll help you. And so to do that, you have to really ask, where's the subject and where's the main verb? Main subject, main verb. Okay. So she gives a few pointers here. Suppose you play detective again. How did that sentence differ from a sentence with an adverb clause? There's a dotted line, right? But it is vertical and nothing is written on it, right? The adverb clauses had a subordinating conjunction on the dotted line. A relative pronoun hangs on the end of the dotted line. Remember, pronouns refer to a noun. There is the antecedent, right? That's what the pronoun refers back to. What does that refer back to? It refers to dog. You can actually, number 3, if you substitute the word above the dotted line for the word at the bottom of the dotted line, it makes sense. Dog barked, right? So you can switch these back and forth. While an adverb clause seemed to come at the beginning of a sentence or after the main clause, the adjective clause came between the subject and the verb of the main clause. It came right after the noun. It modified. This is important. The adjective clause comes right after the noun. It modified. We have this same principle with single word adjectives and adverbs and phrases that were adjectives and adverbs. We can move adverbs all over the place. The adjectives are going to have certain positions in relation to the noun or pronoun that they're modifying, and those generally don't change unless we're using a figure of speech. If you didn't discover all those things, learn them now. Nearly all of them apply to every sentence with an adjective clause in it. Okay, follow these directions as you diagram sentences with adjective clauses. So here they are. Number 1, every time you diagram, go through these. It's like in algebra, you have to follow the steps. If you skip a step in algebra or any other of the mathematics that are a little more complicated, you're going to mess up. You're going to get the wrong solution to your problem. Always go through these steps. Find the main clause, diagram it. Then hang the relative pronoun from the noun or pronoun it refers to. Then 3, find the adjective clause, diagram it with reference to the relative pronoun. And 4, substitute the noun or pronoun at the top of the dotted line for the relative pronoun. Does it make sense? All right, that's like checking your work in algebra. And like I said, you can initially do number 3 first, as long as you then go immediately to identifying the main clause. So let's look at the 2 ways of doing this. Like I said, you can start with, let's do hers first. So first she says, find the main clause. So let's look at number 1. The dog that followed me was wagging its tail. Okay, where's my subject? The dog, right? The dog that followed me was wagging its tail. Was wagging its tail is our verb and direct object, okay, with all the modifiers, okay? So I'm just identifying the main clause. That followed me then is our dependent clause. That's one way of doing it. Let's look at number 2. People who live in glass houses should not throw stones. People is our subject. What's the verb for it? Should not throw stones, right? He who hesitates is lost. Where's the subject? He. What's the verb for it? Is lost. Number 4, I met the lady who called us. I met the lady who called us, okay? I met the lady. She called, number 5, she called about the car that had been sold. She called about the car that had been sold, okay? So those are all the main clauses in orange, and then we have all the adjective clauses: who live in glass houses, that followed me, who live in glass houses, who hesitates, who called us, that had been sold. All of these are in purple. So that's one way to do it. But make sure when you diagram it, always make sure when you diagram the main clause first. Okay, that's the way that she advises. If you're having trouble with these, like what is the, I can't tell the main clause from the adjective clause, then the trick that I'm offering you is to find the relative pronoun first and the adjective clause. So look at number 1. The dog that followed me was wagging its tail. So here's how to do it that way. That is the relative pronoun. Okay, followed me, that's the verb that goes with it. There, I have the adjective clause. Now take the main clause, the independent clause, and diagram it. Okay. What about number 2? Who live in glass houses? I know right away that's the adjective clause because it has who. And look, people should not throw stones. That's the main clause. Number 3, who hesitates? Who hesitates? He who hesitates is lost. Number 4, I met the lady who called us. As long as you got the relative pronouns memorized, this is easy. She called about the car that had been sold. That had been sold. There you go. So now I've identified all the adjective clauses, but when I diagram the main clause first. That is key, absolutely key. So this is the other way that you can do it. If you're struggling in identifying those adjective clauses, I would say do it this way. It's a little easier because sometimes you might get confused between the main clause and the adjective clause. So go ahead and do 4.4, and there will be a video going over how to diagram each one of those. And you can switch to that video now if you'd like, or we can keep going. So check your answers and notice why you made mistakes. This is very important. That's why the answers are in the back of the book. Did you follow the directions exactly? Did you hang the relative pronoun from the thing it referred to? Or when you got to sentence 4, did you think the who had to hang from the subject? Okay, so you're going to see that when you diagram these, it's going to be a little tricky sometimes. An adjective clause can modify any noun or pronoun in the sentence, even as in sentence number 5, a noun that is the object of a preposition. So if you look at number 5, okay, after you've diagrammed this, she called about the car. So where's our independent clause? She called about the car. That had been sold. That had been sold is the adjective clause. What's it modifying? It's modifying car. Car is the object of the preposition, car. So how would you diagram this? We'll do this one just for sake of this. So what do? We put the subject first. We diagram the main clause. She called. Okay. Then we have a prepositional phrase modifying what? Modifying the verb. So we're going to put about car the. So we put about here. About car and the. Now we have to ask, okay, now I have to diagram, right? The relative pronoun, and that's the second step, hang the relative pronoun from the noun or pronoun it refers to. So what does that refer back to? That's what I have to ask. What does that refer back to? That had been sold. What had been sold? The car. So it's referring to the car. So we drop a line, we do it here, dotted line, that, and now we ask, okay, that. It's the what that had been sold. What is it in this relative clause? It's a subject, right? So that, and then we're going to see had been sold, going off the edges here. Okay, and then we diagram it. That had been sold. It's gone off the edges, but you get the principle. The that is being dropped down from car, and then I diagram that adjective clause just like I normally would with a normal clause. Had been sold, that had been sold is going to be diagrammed the same way as it normally would. Okay, can you replace car and that? Yes, you can, right? Car had been sold. It's the car that had been sold. Okay, so that's how you're going to diagram these. Now, it doesn't matter. The adjective clause can modify any noun or pronoun in any part of the sentence. So you have to pay close attention to where that is, where that main noun and pronoun is, because that's where you're going to diagram the adjective clause. So let's continue going through this. Notice once more the direction 3 that says, so number 3, find the adjective clause, diagram it with reference to the relative pronoun. It says find the adjective clause, diagram it with reference to the relative pronoun. What can that mean? Here is a sentence to illustrate. I have found the cap that I lost. Okay. What's the main clause? Ask yourself. I have found the cap. That's the main clause. Main clause, I have found the cap. So diagram it. I have found cap, right? That is referring back to cap. So you drop it down, hang the relative pronoun. So far, so good. Now, ask yourself, how are you going to diagram I lost? Because what's the subject of I lost? Think for a second. It's I. So let's see. I is the subject. Lost is the verb. That is going to be the direct object. So you're going to diagram it like this. This is where adjective clauses get a little tricky. So look at what she says. Now diagram the adjective clause with reference to the relative pronoun. Let's see. The adjective clause is that I lost. The verb is lost. But if I put lost after that and substitute cap for that, I have the cap doing the losing, right? So if I said that loss, the cap that lost, but the cap isn't the one doing the losing, the cap is the thing that is lost. No, something's wrong. What is the subject of loss? Who did the losing in that I lost? Why? I did. Okay, but what happens to that? If I substitute cap for that, I could say I lost cap, right? I lost the cap. That makes sense. So why not diagram it? I lost that. And that is what rule number 3 means. Figure out the job of the relative pronoun. The relative pronoun is doing in its own clause. In this case, it is being the direct object. Yeah, look at what happened to the word order. Here are a number of adjective clauses with the same construction. So this is very important. Let's go back up here. I have to ask for rule number 3. It says diagram with reference to the relative pronoun. This relative pronoun right here, that, we have to ask what job is it doing in the adjective clause. So in order to do that, take the entire adjective clause just like you would a normal sentence. Where's the subject? Where's the verb? That I lost. Who's doing the losing? right? This is how you normally find a subject. It's I. What is I doing? Lost. It's losing. It's lost something. But what is it losing? The that. So the that is our direct object. Okay, so you have to do this at every single relative, every single adjective clause with a relative pronoun, which can be somewhat cumbersome, but just take your time and go through it. So let's look at number 5 here. Okay. So she says, look at what happened to the word order here. Number, okay. That I found, whom he saw, which he took, that we wanted. So these are some more examples like the one that we just saw, that I lost, that I found. I is the subject, found is the verb, that is the direct object, right? Look for the subjects. I found. Whom he saw whom, which he took which, that we wanted that. Right, so these are the subjects. These are the verbs. I found, he saw, he took, we wanted. And then all of the relative pronouns here are actually direct objects. I found that. He saw whom. He took which. We wanted that. And so on. That's how you have to look at every relative pronoun. All of these will be diagrammed the same way, just like this up here. You put the direct object there, subject here, and then the verb here. Okay, so it's the same thing that we've done all along. It just might be a little confusing because of the placement of that relative pronoun, which now comes at the beginning of the adjective clause because it's a relative pronoun. So you just have to pay close attention to that. Okay. Let's see if you really can apply the rule. Okay, so 4-5. I have lost the friend in whom I trusted. Where is the main clause? I have lost the friend. That is the main clause. In whom, okay? In is going to be a preposition in the main clause. Whom is our relative pronoun, right? So this is the beginning of an adjective clause, whom I trusted. So I have lost is our subject and main verb, and then the friend, the is going to go under. Did you get this far? Then ask what is whom doing in its own clause. Check the answers to see if you got it right. So 4-5 is a little tricky. I've lost the friend in whom I trusted. So where's the main clause? First thing, find the main clause, okay? I have lost the friend. You might want to include in that main clause, but no, it doesn't belong there. We'll see in just a second. So I have lost the friend. Where is the relative pronoun? Whom? Whom I trusted. Okay, then what's the in doing? Right? That's a question that we have here. What is the in doing? Well, take the relative clause. How would you say it if you rearrange it? I trusted whom? No, you would say I trusted in whom. So how are you going to diagram it? Okay, so she's diagrammed the first. I have lost the friend. Okay, but what about in whom I trusted? Okay, we'll diagram first the subject and the verb. We have the I and then trusted. Okay, then we have in whom. Well, what is that? What's a prepositional phrase, right? In is a preposition. So we put it here, and we put the in here. All right, so it's the same principles you've learned before, just a little tricky because we have a relative pronoun. So you may ask, okay, well, I thought all adjective clauses have to begin with a relative pronoun. This one begins with a preposition. Okay, we were being a little too tight on that rule. Yeah, you can have here this prepositional phrase in whom the in is actually, right, a preposition, and it's what comes first, but it has its object is the relative pronoun. So you can say begins with the adjective clause begins with the relative pronoun, or the relative pronoun as an object of a preposition. Okay, add that as a little side note maybe. So this, if you practice with these, it's going to take a little bit of time, but you'll eventually get them. Now, for the next bit, going over case, okay, we're going to have a different video. So you can pause this one and head over to the one on case, which is not too complicated. If you know a bit of Arabic, Latin, or Greek, case is going to be very easy for you in English.